Okay, we are now joined by NASCAR's Chief Racing Development Officer, Steve O'Donnell. We're going to roll right into questions for Steve. Our first question is going to come from Bob Pockers. Go ahead with your question, Bob. Bob, you're on mute.
All right, I'm sorry. Steve, the horsepower and spoiler were listed as TBD. How do you go about determining it? And I mean, do you see much difference in the horsepower and spoilers on these cars than what we see currently?
I think somewhat similar range, Bob. We're still trying to dial in a few things. Still a couple other conversations to have with the industry, the engine builders, as we see kind of leading into the next couple super speedway races, the All-Star race, and then make a final decision. So we're within a window where the industry's comfortable with. We know that we can take that to future technologies as well. So we'll be somewhat close to the where we're at today, but still not finalized.
Our next question will come from Dustin Long. Go ahead with your question, Dustin.
Steve, with the diffuser, how much does that help in terms of changing the liftoff speed of the car? And is there at this point any update in terms of what you guys are finding in the Joey Logano crash? If there's concern about how that it lifted, or was it as much because of the contact from another car?
Yeah, so two parts there, Dustin. I'd say from the diffuser, we'll certainly add to the components of liftoff and help. That's why we put it there. But similar to the characteristics of the current car, will be if not better than where we are today in terms of liftoff. And then in terms of Joey's incident, yeah, we've done a lot of work on that. We actually just presented it to the drivers. We're having ongoing dialogue with the drivers. I think if anything, you can see us take a look at the speeds of the cars as we head potentially into our next super speedway race. But yeah, it all had to do with kind of the angle and where the car was and the contact.
Thank you.
Our next question is going to come from Kelly Crandall. Go ahead with your question, Kelly.
Thanks, Matt. Hey, Steve, I'm curious,
hey,
with the underbodies of these cars now being sealed, how do you plan on addressing driver cooling in the cockpit? Have there been concerns about drivers maybe being more overheated because of the bodies now being sealed more on the bottom?
No, it's a good question, but the drivers have talked to us. The good news about this car is really from the onset, we've worked with them of the different components, what they're feeling in the car, how that will work. So I think we're comfortable with the cooling system right now and where things are at. We'll still look at some things as we go through these multi-car tests coming up, in August, October, and November to see if there's any more we can learn from what we need to do inside the car. But as far as car temps, feel like we're in a good spot if we were just to kind of leave it as is heading into Daytona.
Our next question will come from Jeff Gluck. Go ahead with the question, Jeff.
Steve, obviously, when these cars get on the track next year, it's not going to be the final product in terms of the racing as the teams work on it and you guys work on it and get the cars where you want to be. What's a reasonable timeline, I guess, in your mind in terms of when you feel like the product on the track is what you'll want to see? I mean, are we talking, is it going to take a full season next year? Do you feel like a couple months? Like what's a timeline?
Good question, Bob. I think everyone will want to judge it, after the Daytona 500. That's the nature of our business. But in reality, I think you do need to take the full year and even into 2023, candidly, because, you've seen even between last year and this year, the difference, even with a lot of the rules in place, the number of winners we've had this year, and just the difference in how different teams are performing. So we'll take a look at, each and every track. I think it would be fair if you looked at, the first time we went to a venue, how did that relate to the second race? What are the changes that we may or may not have seen? And then it'll be our job to work with the industry and make sure that the reasons for this car and the reasons we put it together remain intact. That's to deliver the best racing possible and make sure that we keep it within the bounds of allowing as many teams to go out there and compete for wins.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Alan Cavana. Go ahead with the question, Alan.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Alan.
Well, what is a fair way to judge it? Kind of following up on Jeff's question. I mean, will it be, lap times? Will it be results, parity? What is the best way to judge this project, if you will, in the years to come, whenever you may start?
No, it's a great question. I think you all will do a great job of judging it. That's the nature of our business. In terms of what storylines are out there, usually storylines come from the competitiveness on the racetrack. So we'll look at not necessarily speeds, right? We want to look at the safety aspect for sure, but we're going to look at how many teams can be competitive. The number of different leaders, the number of different winners, the OEMs. Are they all able to compete? And then longer term, what is this doing for ownership? Not only for our existing owners, but potentially new owners. And then from there, looking at OEMs. So, this won't just be kind of a 1 or 2 to 3 month, overview from us. We're going to look at it from the long term. This was a project that's taken a long time. And the reason is we want this to go out into the future and be a product that can not only race in 22, but well beyond that for the fans. And ultimately, the fans are going to judge this. And if the fans like what they see, we'll continue to do more of that.
And just to follow up on safety, the new car, is it adaptable? You may learn something from the Joey crash or what have you. Maybe it's different by the Daytona 500 or even going forward. Is there adaptability built into the car in terms if a safety change is needed?
Absolutely. We can make any change just as if we do today. Changes that were made, from Daytona to Talladega, those same things are in our toolkit, so to speak, to be able to do that. So if we found something that we need to react to from a safety standpoint, we can do that, and we will do that.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Elizabeth Worth. Go ahead with your question, Elizabeth.
Hi, Steve.
Hey,
In talking to a few drivers, the new symmetrical design has completely altered the flow of air around the cars. How is that going to impact racing, especially when you get into traffic on a busy track?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that we've noticed around our racing is, the side force issue. And that was something that we really tried to tackle with this new design and in the race car. So it won't be easy. It's going to be more difficult to drive, especially as you get into the corners. But that's something that we're encouraged by. We want to put more of this back in the driver's hands. So we'll judge that, especially on the intermediate tracks. What are drivers able to do for each and every lap, pulling up on cars and that ability to pass and not be stalled out. So that's something we're really going to focus in on as we go throughout the 22 season.
Our next question is going to come from Jim Utter. Go ahead with your question, Jim.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
I was just curious, is the next gen chassis built by Dallara intended to be a Cup Series only car for the foreseeable future, or are there any plans to change what is run in Xfinity or trucks?
That's a great question, Jim. For now, it is solely Cup. As we take a look and evolve this, we want to take a look at, where could it play? If we really like the directions it's going in from all aspects, not just the racing, but when we look at kind of the whole car in its entirety around potential ownership and where we're going and new OEMs. There are some things we could look at, body styles that you may be able to put on that chassis. So nothing planned today, but we have had some internal discussions on where could this be, not only domestically, but maybe this is something to use internationally as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim.
Our next question will come from Chris Pickering. Go ahead with your question, Chris.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Chris.
So you've got a lot of changes on this car. What would you say has been the single biggest kind of conceptual change or the biggest engineering headache? Is there anything that's kind of giving you guys sleepless nights?
Oh, man. You name it, every part and piece. It really depended on the discussions you were having. It started out particularly around the OEMs, the desire for some to go to one lug, others not, the desire for some teams to have some different looks on the car. So I'd say for us, it was just, once we had buy-in of that, we were going to listen and work together as much as possible. We weren't always going to agree. But each part and piece became something that when you sat down as a group for that first RFP and, vendors came in and gave their gave their presentation, that got easier along the way. And I think we tended to have the same answers or the same reactions across the board in our industry about a particular vendor. So things got much easier as we went through the process. So it's tough to point out one. I'd say maybe just the initial that we're going and we're going to do this, getting everyone to buy in on the concept overall was probably the toughest.
And if I could just follow up there in terms of the headline grabbing changes like the independent rear suspension and the rack and pinion steering and things, was there one of those features that stood out?
Probably the steering aspect. And I think, especially around the OEMs, that was big. You heard Joey talk about going to the 5th gear. I think there's a lot of components that some would probably think that were already part of the cars that we currently race that we wanted to modernize. And, for us to be able to do that in step with the OEMs was a big deal.
Thank you.
Our next question is going to come from Greg Engel. Go ahead with the question, Greg.
Hey, Steve, congrats on making it to this point. Obviously, we've only seen 2 cars on a track at a time. Any talk about doing a mass test and getting more than 2? Could we see something like we used to have in January where we would go to Daytona and test? Could we see another January Daytona test, or maybe, I don't know, doing an all-star race?
Yeah, it's a great point. So we have tests coming up in August. Will be the first time that we'll look at Daytona with multiple cars on the track. And then as you fast forward towards the end of the season, October, I believe, we'll have both the Roval and the Oval with multiple cars on the track from each of the race teams. And then following that up, post Phoenix, we'll dial that in with the race teams as well, with a number of cars out on the track. So don't have anything concrete yet for Daytona around that January timeframe, but those will be what will be in place towards the end of this year with multiple cars out there.
You're open to that?
Daytona, yeah, I think there's still discussions, as we look at framing up and finalizing the overall 22 schedule. Part of those discussions are around what could be cool around a test here or there. So yeah, we'd be open to that.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Welcome. Our final question here for Steve will come from Lee Spencer. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks for joining us, OD. I'm sorry if this has already been asked, but Steve Phelps talked about how competitive the car is expected.
Oh, I lost you there, Lee.
Nuts and bolts. But that being said, and I apologize if this has already been asked, but how much safety testing has gone into the course of the development of this car?
Well, we'd be happy to take you through kind of all the CFD runs that have been done with the car. We've had an incredible amount of safety analysis already done, and we've got some coming up with actual on track where we'll crash the car as well, like we do similarly to Nebraska. So we took the drivers through that yesterday. We will continue to do that and meet with the drivers. But when you see all the testing that's gone in, an incredible amount of focus on that area to make sure that these cars are as safe as possible. I think we've got a pretty good track record with this current car. And the good news is we can build upon that. And what we've learned is already incorporated into this car, and then we're able to adjust where we need to.
Thanks for your time, OD.
Thank you.
Steve, thank you for joining us, and can't wait to see this car on track.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Take care now.